So if you take 10 handicaps and put 3 10 handicaps on the tee, and the first one is the typical 10 handicap in every category with their driver, their approach play, their short game, and their putting. The other 10 handicap is an extremely good putter, one of the best putters for 10 handicaps you'll find. And the other player is a horrible putter, one of the worst putters for a 10 handicap you'll find. Now, they're all 10 handicaps. Every single one of them is going to be a 10. The really bad putter putts like the typical 20 handicap. The really good putter will putt like the typical scratch player. There's a huge amount of skill difference between the typical 20 handicap putter and the typical scratch putter, about 5 shots per round. And so generically, I would tell you if you're a 10 or a 15, which a lot of people are, they fall into that range, I would tell you ball striking is probably really important. But you might be different. You might be somebody that is a horrific putter for a 10 handicap, and you should be focusing your efforts on that part of the game. And tracking your stats and looking at your information is going to give you that blueprint on how you can improve faster. Hopefully that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I think, so if we were to say, to speak in generics or averages, because we can't say, if our listeners are on which end of the putting spectrum or driving spectrum they might actually be. What are the statistical differences between sort of a lot of folks in this experiment are probably trying to get to scratch, and they might be at, say, a 10. That's a long way to go, or wherever you're trying to go. What are the statistical differences between, what they do in a round of golf between a 10 handicap and a scratch player? We know, okay, yeah, you post X score and you get X handicap, but what's actually happening usually on the golf course to create that scoring disparity?
Yeah, if we just consider the typical scratch player versus the typical 10 player, the scratch player is, and this is going to sound, silly and obvious, but they're better in everything across the board. They're better with their driver, they're better with their approach play, they're better with their short game, they're better with their putting. Now, the biggest delta in one of those categories is typically going to be with approach play. That's where you're going to see the biggest difference in skill. And improving your approach play is typically a pathway that's going to lead to more improvement, quicker improvement. And off the tee is also extremely important. And there's a pretty big delta there. Putting as well. And so each one of these, there's a pretty big gap between a 10 and a scratch. But if you want to improve and get down to being a scratch player, ball striking is absolutely going to be key. And that oftentimes doesn't just mean hitting it closer. It means not having big misses. It means making your bad shots a little bit better, less penalty strokes, less hitting into the trees and having to come out sideways, less hitting into really challenging bunker situations. 10 and 15 handicaps typically struggle out of bunkers. So it's those kind of decisions and those kind of shots that can really move the needle for you. And then the other thing that's huge is distance. There's a big distance gap off the tee between a scratch player and a 10 handicap player, roughly about 30 yards off the tee. And it's huge. That's a huge impact on the game. Every 10 yards is going to be, there's no perfect formula here, but it's maybe a shot roughly every 10 yards off the tee. So if you're 30 yards longer, that's going to be about 3 shots, give or take. Again, these are just some rough estimates. So if speed training is part of what you are trying to do in your index experiment, I would encourage people to look at speed training as something that could potentially be low-hanging fruit for them.
Oh, I like it. We actually have in our Discord server, the Broken Tea Society, we have the Need for Speed group, chasing speed for sure. So a lot of speed training going on this off season. I'm getting into some. I keep saying like tomorrow's the day I start my speed regimen. Maybe it is now after hearing that. I know I can squeeze 20 more yards out. That's 2 strokes. That would kind of get me where I want to be. Also, physical conditioning. I know a lot of our people are trying to get in better shape, which is going to help us hit us farther as well. And of course, we're all hitting the TSR driver from Titleist. So that's gonna, or if you do, you will find some more of those elusive yardages as well. I love your posts are great.
I
They're
appreciate
very
that.
simple and clean and convincing because you've got the data. Twitter is full of a lot of anecdotal whatever, and it's nice to see stats where it's like, okay, we can all maybe agree on something. Statistics. You got 650 billion golf shots. These are coming from. One that stood out to me recently, and I'm probably misquoting it, but the 1.8 birdies per round. The difference between was a 12 and a scratch player, or there was whatever players it was pretty small in terms of how many more birdies you actually had to make per round. It was a hopeful stat. Which one was that?
Yeah, that's the difference between scratch players and 18 handicaps. So there's 18 shots worth of difference between them, but only 1.8 of those shots is because the scratch players make more birdies. So the ticket
That's
to
cool.
getting better isn't more birdies. It's less of the doubles, the triples, the quads and worse. It's reducing those, and you're going to do that by reducing penalty shots, the number of tee shots you hit OB or into the water, number of approach shots you're hitting into penalty situations. That's going to be a big driver to reducing some of those big numbers, and then making your bad shots just a little less bad.